What if I told you that somewhere beneath the cold waters of the Pacific Ocean lies a fully equipped World War II hospital that has never been found? A medical facility so secret that it was deliberately hidden from both enemy forces and Allied command, treating wounded soldiers in complete isolation for months before vanishing without a trace. Today we're diving deep into one of the most bizarre and unexplained mysteries of the Second World War. This isn't your typical lost submarine or sunken battleship story. This is about an entire underground medical complex that operated in the shadows, saved countless lives, and then disappeared so completely that most military historians refuse to believe it ever existed. But the evidence is there if you know where to look. Hidden in classified documents, encrypted radio transmissions, and the testimonies of elderly veterans who've kept a secret for over 80 years. And what we've uncovered will change everything you thought you knew about wartime medicine and covert operations. The story begins in early 1943, deep in the Solomon Islands campaign. American forces were pushing hard against entrenched Japanese positions, and casualties were mounting at an alarming rate. Field hospitals were overwhelmed, medical ships were sitting ducks for enemy aircraft, and wounded soldiers were dying not from their injuries, but from the simple fact that there was nowhere safe to treat them. That's when a small group of Navy medical officers came up with what seemed like an impossible solution. What if they could create a hospital that was completely invisible to the enemy? Not just camouflaged or hidden, but literally beneath the ocean floor, accessible only through underwater passages, and completely self-contained. The man behind this audacious plan was Commander James Richardson, a brilliant surgeon who had served in the First World War and witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of exposed medical facilities. Richardson had become obsessed with the idea of submerged medical care after studying early diving bell technology and submarine life support systems. Working in absolute secrecy, Richardson assembled a team of marine engineers, diving specialists, and medical personnel. They identified a location near a small uninhabited island in the Solomon chain, where underwater volcanic activity had created a series of natural caverns roughly 60 feet below the surface. The location was perfect, deep enough to avoid detection from aircraft, but shallow enough for divers to access regularly. The volcanic rock provided natural insulation, and the geothermal vents could potentially power basic electrical systems. Most importantly, it was positioned along a major shipping route where wounded could be discreetly transferred without arousing suspicion. Construction began in March 1943 using a combination of military personnel and civilian contractors who were sworn to absolute secrecy. The operation was so classified that it didn't even have an official designation. Internal documents referred to it simply as Project Neptune, though even that name appears in fewer than a dozen surviving records. The engineering challenges were staggering. Every piece of equipment, every medical supply, every structural component had to be transported underwater and assembled in pressurized chambers. They created an elaborate system of airlocks, pressure chambers, and sealed compartments that could maintain a sterile environment while remaining completely submerged. The facility itself was remarkable. 3 main chambers connected by waterproof corridors, with a total capacity for 40 patients. The main surgical suite was equipped with advanced lighting systems powered by a combination of hand-crank generators and a primitive geothermal energy converter. There were separate wards for different types of injuries, a pharmacy stocked with essential medicines, and living quarters for the medical staff. Perhaps most ingeniously, the entire facility was designed to be completely self-sufficient. Fresh water was obtained through a sophisticated filtration system that processed seawater. Food supplies were stored in hermetically sealed containers, and waste was disposed of through a series of tubes that carried it far from the installation to avoid detection. The first patients arrived in late May 1943. They were soldiers suffering from severe combat wounds who couldn't be treated at conventional field hospitals without risking exposure to enemy forces. The underwater hospital could perform complex surgeries, provide extended recovery periods, and return soldiers to active duty without anyone knowing they had ever been wounded. For 6 months, the facility operated flawlessly. Dozens of wounded servicemen received treatment in what was essentially an underwater medical miracle. The survival rates were extraordinary, partly because of the sterile environment and partly because patients could receive extended care without the constant threat of enemy attack. The medical staff lived underwater for weeks at a time, surfacing only when absolutely necessary for supply runs or personnel rotations. They developed specialized techniques for underwater medical procedures, created new protocols for treating patients in pressurized environments, and pioneered surgical methods that wouldn't be seen in conventional medicine for decades. But the most remarkable aspect wasn't the technology or the medical innovations. It was a complete secrecy. Throughout its entire operation, fewer than 200 people knew of the facility's existence. Messages were sent using a unique code that mixed medical terminology with diving references. Supply runs were disguised as routine patrol missions. Even the wounded soldiers who were treated, they were told they were being taken to a classified facility, but never knew they were actually underwater. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was one of 3 nurses assigned to the facility. In a recently discovered diary, she wrote about the surreal experience of performing surgery 60 feet below the ocean surface, while fish swam past reinforced windows. She described the strange sense of isolation and the incredible dedication of the medical team who had volunteered for what they knew was an extremely dangerous assignment. The facility's greatest test came in September 1943 during a major Japanese offensive. Conventional field hospitals were evacuated or destroyed, but the underwater facility continued operating throughout the entire battle. While explosions rocked the surface and ships burned overhead, surgeons below performed life-saving operations in complete safety. It was during this period that the facility treated its most famous patient, though his identity remains classified even today. What we know from coded communications is that a high-ranking officer with critical intelligence was severely wounded and required immediate surgery. Taking him to a conventional hospital would have risked both his life and the sensitive information he possessed. The underwater surgical team performed a complex 8-hour operation that saved not only the officer's life, but potentially changed the course of the war. The intelligence he provided upon recovery led directly to several successful Allied operations in the Pacific theater. But success breeds attention, even when that success is supposed to be invisible. By October 1943, strange reports were reaching Japanese intelligence. Wounded American soldiers were disappearing from battlefields only to reappear weeks later, fully healed and back in combat. There were no records of medical evacuations, no hospital admissions, no documentation of their treatment. Japanese forces began conducting systematic searches of all known Allied medical facilities. They interrogated captured medics, analyzed intercepted communications, and even started using underwater reconnaissance to search for hidden installations. The pressure was mounting, and Commander Richardson knew that discovery was becoming increasingly likely. The decision to abandon the facility came suddenly in November 1943. Japanese dive teams had been spotted near the island, and intercepted communications suggested they were specifically looking for underwater installations. Richardson had less than 48 hours to evacuate patients, destroy sensitive equipment, and eliminate all traces of the facility's existence. The evacuation was a masterpiece of military logistics. Every patient was stabilized for transport. Critical equipment was either evacuated or destroyed, and the entire medical staff was relocated to conventional facilities. Most remarkably, they managed to seal the caverns in a way that made them appear completely natural while preserving the possibility of future access. But something went wrong during the final phases of the evacuation. According to the few surviving records, a small team of medical personnel and several patients remained behind to complete the destruction of sensitive documents and equipment. They were supposed to evacuate on the final transport, but that transport never arrived. Weather conditions had deteriorated rapidly, making underwater operations extremely dangerous. The evacuation team made the difficult decision to return to base, planning to attempt a rescue mission once conditions improved. But when they returned 3 days later, the facility was completely sealed and there was no sign of the remaining personnel. What happened to those final occupants remains one of the greatest mysteries of the war. Some theories suggest they successfully evacuated through alternate routes, and their records were simply lost or classified. Others believe they may have been trapped by the rapid sealing of the caverns, becoming prisoners of their own security measures. The most intriguing theory, supported by several decoded messages, suggests that the remaining team chose to stay behind permanently. Faced with the possibility of capture and the torture that would inevitably reveal the facility's secrets, they may have decided to seal themselves inside, taking the location of the underwater hospital to their graves. In the decades following the war, several attempts have been made to locate the facility. Military diving teams conducted searches in the 1950s and 60s, using increasingly sophisticated sonar equipment and underwater cameras. Marine archaeologists have explored the region, looking for any traces of the installation. But the Solomon Islands cover thousands of square miles of ocean, and the original location records were apparently destroyed as part of the evacuation protocol. The few surviving references use code names for geographical landmarks, making precise identification nearly impossible. Modern technology has brought new hope to the search. Satellite imaging, advanced sonar mapping, and deep-sea exploration vehicles have revealed previously unknown underwater features throughout the Solomon chain. Several promising locations have been identified, showing artificial modifications to natural cave systems that could indicate human construction. In 2015, a team of marine archaeologists claimed to have found evidence of the facility near a small island they declined to name publicly. Their findings included corroded metal fragments consistent with 1940s medical equipment, sealed containers with pharmaceutical residue, and what appear to be artificially modified cave entrances. However, their research was quickly classified by the U.S. Navy, and subsequent expeditions to the area have been restricted. Official statements claim the restrictions are for environmental protection, but many researchers believe the military is still actively suppressing information about the underwater hospital. The most compelling recent evidence comes from an unexpected source. In 2018, a recreational diving group discovered what they initially thought was a natural formation near one of the outer Solomon Islands. Closer examination revealed tool marks on the rock faces, sealed passages that appear to be artificial, and most intriguingly, a corroded metal plate with partial markings that could be consistent with U.S. Navy identification codes. Before they could conduct a thorough investigation, the divers were contacted by military authorities and asked to sign non-disclosure agreements. The site was subsequently declared a protected marine reserve, effectively ending public access. But perhaps the most convincing evidence comes from the veterans themselves. In the past decade, several elderly servicemen have come forward with stories about the underwater hospital. Their accounts, given independently and often years apart, show remarkable consistency in describing the facility's layout, operations, and personnel. Robert Chun, now 96 years old, served as a diving specialist with the Navy during the war. He claims to have made dozens of supply runs to what he calls the deepest secret of the Pacific War. His descriptions of the facility's air-lock systems, the layout of the medical wards, and even the personality quirks of the medical staff match details found in the few surviving official documents. Similarly, former Army medic Thomas Wright has spent the last 20 years trying to convince historians that he was treated at an underwater facility after being severely wounded in 1943. His medical records from the war show a mysterious 6-week gap where he was listed as missing in action, followed by a sudden return to duty with complete recovery from injuries that should have required months of conventional treatment. These veterans face a difficult challenge. They're trying to prove the existence of something that was designed to leave no trace, something so secret that even acknowledging its existence could theoretically still be considered a security breach. Many have been discouraged from speaking publicly, while others have been told their memories are confused or that they're mixing up different wartime experiences. The psychological impact of maintaining such a significant secret for over 80 years cannot be understated. Several veterans have described the burden of carrying knowledge about comrades who may have died in the facility, medical innovations that could have benefited civilian medicine, and engineering achievements that challenged the boundaries of what was thought possible in the 1940s. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, a military historian who has spent decades studying classified World War II operations, believes the underwater hospital represents something larger than just an innovative medical facility. In her view, it demonstrates the extraordinary lengths to which military planners were willing to go to gain tactical advantages, even if it meant pushing technology and human endurance to their absolute limits. The facility also raises important questions about medical ethics during wartime. The doctors and nurses who volunteered for underwater duty were essentially conducting human experimentation, testing whether patients would recover successfully in pressurized environments with limited resources. While their intentions were undoubtedly noble, the lack of informed consent and the experimental nature of the treatment protocols will be considered highly problematic by modern standards. From a technological perspective, the underwater hospital was decades ahead of its time. The life support systems, pressure management, and SEAL construction techniques wouldn't be seen again until the development of deep-sea research stations in the 1970s. If detailed plans and construction records had survived, they could have significantly accelerated the development of underwater habitation technology. The facility's impact on military medicine may have been equally significant. The techniques developed for treating patients in confined, isolated environments likely influenced the design of mobile surgical units, the development of field sterilization procedures, and the creation of self-contained medical facilities for special operations. But perhaps most importantly, the underwater hospital represents the thousands of unknown sacrifices made by ordinary people during extraordinary circumstances. The medical staff who volunteered for months of underwater isolation, the engineers who solved impossible construction challenges, the support personnel who maintained absolute secrecy for over 80 years, and possibly the final team who chose to seal themselves inside rather than risk revealing the facility's location. Today, as military medicine continues to evolve and new conflicts create new challenges for battlefield medical care, the lessons learned from the underwater hospital remain relevant. The facility demonstrated that innovative thinking, combined with absolute dedication and willingness to take extraordinary risks, could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. The search for the facility continues, driven by a combination of historical curiosity, technological capability, and the persistent testimonies of aging veterans. Each new advancement in underwater exploration technology brings a possibility of finally locating and documenting this remarkable achievement. Whether the underwater hospital will ever be found remains uncertain. The ocean is vast, the original records are incomplete, and the passage of time has likely altered or destroyed much of the physical evidence. But the story itself serves as a powerful reminder that history is full of incredible achievements that were never meant to be known, extraordinary sacrifices that were never meant to be recognized, and innovations that were never meant to be remembered. The secret underwater World War II hospital may remain lost beneath the Pacific waves, but its legacy lives on the testimonies of those who served there, the lives that were saved within its pressurized chambers, an enduring mystery that continues to capture our imagination more than 80 years later.